Right when YNW Melly got famous, he finally made it out of poverty. He was on top of the rap game and all his work finally paid off. But when everything was going so well, his whole career stopped when he got arrested back in 2019. Ever since, he's been stuck in jail for the past 6 years waiting for his trial to actually finish. Where did it all go wrong? Growing up, YNW Melly never had it easy. Born in a small town in Florida to a single mother that gave birth to him in the 9th grade, she had a hard time taking care of him, not even being able to pay for food sometimes. It got to the point where Melly's grandmother had to help take care of him at times. Growing up like this with no father and moving to different projects around Florida ain't exactly a good start. But in the middle of all of it, when Melly was 9, he was just playing around at his uncle's house when he found his gun under the couch. Melly was playing with toy guns before this, so he didn't really think much of it. But when the gun went off, it was so loud he couldn't even hear for a week. After that happened, only then he realized that was a real gun. All before the age of 10, he was already obsessed with weapons. He started carrying his uncle's revolver everywhere he went, including school. Back in the 7th grade, he brought a knife to his middle school and even threatening to kill someone along with himself. On top of the fact he's clearly been mentally disturbed from a young age, he started associating with the Bloods and getting more active in the streets. And from this point was when he started getting in a lot of trouble. One day in 2015, he shot at a few kids not that far away from Vero Beach High School. Nobody got hurt, but Melly still got caught and convicted of aggravated assault, battery, and shooting a gun in public. He had to spend a year in juvie, and this was when he started writing some songs. He had already been making music as far back as 2014, and he started up a group called YNW with his friends Sack Chaser, Juvie, and Portland. At first, he was just freestyling with his friends and dropping on SoundCloud, but only now he was getting deep on his song. Right around this time, he actually came up with the hook "The Murder on My Mind" when he was sitting in juvie. And when he finally got out on probation in late 2016, he recorded 772 Love and dropped it on SoundCloud. He was getting a buzz locally in Florida, but he got more attention from "Murder on My Mind." And apparently his PO found out about that song too, and this detailed ass song saying all this stuff fantasizing about murder got him sent back to jail. But this time around, he was getting some more buzz off those 2 songs he dropped on SoundCloud while he was sitting in jail. His family made a whole ass music video for 772 Love because he wasn't able to do it himself. And his team was making free Melly t-shirts. When he got out of jail again in 2018, he was blowing up. And he wasted no time making more moves for his career. He signed to 300 Entertainment and he was dropping songs like Melly the Menace, Blue Balenciagas, Butter Pecan, and Murder on My Mind finally got its own video. He was doing shows around Florida and the rest of the US while everybody was trying to figure out who YNW Melly was. Melly stood out at the time because of how he was able to sing a love song to Steal Your Girl and go sing about murder on his mind in the same song. He was getting big. He was getting recognized by people in the industry like Young Thug, Lil Uzi, and Lil Durk. Melly was going crazy off of like 5 songs at the same time, all for him to get arrested again in June of 2018. He got caught with a gun and some weed along with his friend YNW Portland. They both posted bond and got out the next day. After that, Melly seemed unstoppable. He was taking over the charts. His mixtape IMU went gold. He linked up with Kanye after Sci-Hi the Prince showed him his music and they made mixed personalities. This man went from being a rapper buzzing locally in Florida to being a superstar and working with Kanye West over the span of a year. Everything seemed to be going great for him until one night in October of 2018. Melly was just making some music at the studio one night with YNW, Sack Chaser, Juvie, and Portland. They left the studio around 2 in the morning and Portland gets behind the wheel of a gray Jeep and Sack Chaser sat in the front seat while Juvie was sitting in the back. Portland drove nearly 30 miles all the way from Fort Lauderdale to Miramar and then he decides to get off I-75. Right when he's driving on Miramar Parkway, the car gets shot at from the right and Sack Chaser and Juvie were shot multiple times. Coincidentally, they're right around the corner from a hospital and when Portland pulls up to Miramar Hospital, he tells paramedics that they had just been in a drive-by. Juvie and Sack Chaser were rushed into the hospital and the doctors did as much as they could, but they were pronounced dead at the scene. For the moment, nobody knew what actually happened and it seemed like Portland had just barely survived a drive-by. Melly posted this on Twitter and everybody felt bad for him. He kept on moving on with his career like usual, but when police started actually investigating this, nothing made sense. They shut down Miramar Parkway where the shooting apparently happened, but they didn't find no shell casings or any other evidence to prove that a drive-by had actually happened on that street. And to make it all even more suspicious, there were no reports of any shootings or gunshots in the area on the night of October 26th. And since this was an alleged drive-by, they tried to see if they could find any bullet residue on Bortland since he was right next to someone who got shot to death. But again, they found nothing. Police interrogated a man named Don Tavius who lived with Sack Chaser and Juvie, and it turns out he was also at that same studio that night. Originally, he said that he and Melly just went home in his car, but then later he changed up his story and told him that Melly did leave the studio in that Jeep with Bortland in them, but he said that he went and picked them up right before the murders happened. The cops got the manager who owns that studio to give over footage from the security cameras, and it turns out Melly did sit in the backseat of that Jeep where Sack Chaser and Juvie got killed. And they figured out through cell phone records that Don Tavius was nowhere near Melly that night. Police knew damn well that he was lying his ass off. Melly was definitely in that same car where his friends got killed, and the fact that Don Tavius was lying this much to cover him made Melly seem more guilty. And to make him look even more guilty, they found a shell casing inside the car in a plastic bag hidden below Melly's seat. And after the cops asked T-Mobile to hand over cell phone records from that night, they were able to piece together what probably happened. It looks like that Melly and his friends got in that Jeep and left the studio around 2 a.m. Bortland drove them all the way to the outskirts of Miramar where nobody could hear nothing, so Melly could shoot Sack Chaser and Juvie from the back seat and frame it as a drive-by. And for over 25 minutes, they were driving around the Miramar area, possibly coming up with lies to tell to the cops, while Juvie and Sack Chaser would have been bleeding out in their seats. And just 3 minutes before Bortland made it to the hospital, Melly allegedly hopped out the car to separate himself from the crime scene. While Bortland was taking them to the hospital and telling the paramedics the drive-by story, Melly called his girlfriend on FaceTime to tell her he was in a drive-by and that he needed to get picked up. Keep in mind, it took the state of Florida 4 whole months to figure this all out. This whole time, Melly was still out here doing shows, he dropped an album and was moving on with his career as usual, while behind the scenes, they were building a case against him. As soon as they pulled out a warrant for his arrest, Melly turned himself in immediately. And just like what happened with TK, everybody was focusing on YNW Melly after he got arrested because of how related his music was to his crimes. But unlike The Race, Murder on My Mind came out a year before the murders happened, so he wasn't technically snitching on himself for some he did, but instead it just didn't really age that well. After he got put in jail, it took 4 years for his trial to start. It just kept getting delayed and pushed back over and over again, and his team dropped 2 albums before his trial finally started in June of 2023. But even after all this time, they somehow didn't have enough evidence to prove Melly guilty of premeditated murder. There's evidence of the drive-by being staged, including the shell casings inside and outside the car in the outskirts of Miramar, and the cell phone records that tracked everybody's location. But since they couldn't find the murder weapon or figure out the reason why Melly and Bortland would even plan to do this in the first place, there still wasn't enough evidence to convince the jury to reach a verdict. And since the jury wasn't able to decide on guilty or not guilty, the judge called a mistrial, basically meaning they had to start all over again and go find a new jury. They had to set up a whole ass trial again, and just like the first time, it kept getting delayed for years. This the whole reason why Melly been sitting in jail for so long, cause this case is a mess. The state of Florida has been trying so hard to prove him guilty, but they haven't been able to get enough evidence to convince the jury to decide he's guilty. 2 years later, the trial was about to start in September 2025, but YNW Bortland took a plea deal the day before the trial. Bortland could have gotten multiple life sentences and an extra 75 years with no parole for them 2 murder charges, but after taking this plea deal, they dropped the murder charges and the life sentences, and now he's only getting 10 years with credit for time served and 6 years probation. So basically, he's getting out in 2032. Now this changes everything. For the past 6 years, the state of Florida hasn't been able to completely prove what happened that night because there hasn't been enough evidence. But now the only other person who was in the car that night is taking the plea deal. As soon as Bortland did this, the news reported this and everybody figured out about it and started saying he's gonna tell. His lawyer tried to say he's not gonna tell on Melly, but that he's still gonna say something to the police. But Broward County literally said that Bortland has to talk about what went down that night. Whenever you get caught up in a case for a crime along with other people, the moment you take the plea deal, you usually have to get on the stand and testify. Since Bortland took the plea deal, now the trial's not starting until 2027. But considering how many delays there's been, it might start even later. But whenever it does start, Bortland does have to talk to the police, and if they finally get all the proof they need, YNW Melly's either getting a life sentence or he's gonna get executed.